In 1977, San Jose was alive with color, disco music, neon bars, and a California optimism that made every Friday night feel eternal. But for one young woman named Jeanette Ralston, that feeling would die long before dawn. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed. We bring you real stories, no fiction, no embellishment, just the truth that time tried to bury. It was the summer of 1977. Jeanette Ralston, just 24 years old, had her life orbiting between work, friends, and her little Volkswagen Beetle. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, who laughed easily, who filled rooms with warmth rather than noise. That night, she told friends she might stop by a bar in downtown San Jose. A quiet drink before heading home. No one imagined that would be the last time anyone saw her alive. Outside, the city buzzed, music leaking from open doors, engines purring down Santa Clara Street. Jeanette finished her drink, said goodnight, and disappeared into the warm California darkness. The next morning, a passing driver noticed a small car parked awkwardly near a side street in San Jose. The windows were fogged, the driver's door slightly open. Inside was Jeanette Ralston. She had been strangled, her body left in the back seat of her Volkswagen Beetle. Detectives from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office arrived within the hour. The crime scene was hauntingly still, the kind of silence that lingers when something terrible has happened. On the passenger seat lay a pack of cigarettes, a few personal belongings, and nothing that screamed motive. No signs of robbery. No forced entry. Just a quiet, deliberate act of violence. Investigators dusted the Beetle for prints. They lifted several, but none matched anyone in their files. They collected the pack of cigarettes, the clothing, and biological samples. In 1977, forensic science was primitive by modern standards. DNA testing was still a decade away. Back then, evidence was catalogued, stored, and often forgotten when leads dried up. For Jeanette's case, they ran through every possible suspect, bar patrons, co-workers, acquaintances, but each lead dissolved into uncertainty. Her case file grew thicker. The answers grew thinner. Jeanette left behind a young son, just 6 years old. He would grow up with more questions than memories. Her family pleaded for answers. The San Jose community held vigils. But as months turned to years, the headlines faded. Another name joined the long list of California's unsolved murders. Deputy District Attorney Rob Baker, then still a young lawyer, remembered the case even as it passed between generations of investigators. He would later describe it as one that haunted every cold case prosecutor who came through this office. By the 1990s, Jeanette's Volkswagen Beetle had been stored away, evidence boxes sealed, and witnesses dispersed across the state. The fingerprints on the cigarette pack remained, waiting, like ghosts, for technology to catch up. Every few years, someone would reopen the file. They'd read the same notes, study the same photos, and hit the same dead ends. Time was erasing details, but it couldn't erase the truth. Inside the cold case unit, detectives kept a list of victims they swore never to forget. Jeanette's name was near the top. Fast forward to August 2024. Rob Baker, now a seasoned prosecutor in the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office, found himself looking again at that old case file. The fingerprints on that cigarette pack still hadn't found a match, but the technology used to test them had evolved drastically. "Let's run those prints again," Baker told the lab. "Maybe this time, we get lucky." It was an unassuming request, one that would soon rewrite 47 years of mystery. Nearly half a century after her death, the past was about to speak again. Nearly 5 decades had passed since that summer night in 1977. Files had been opened, closed, and reopened so many times that the ink had faded. But this time, something was different. For the first time, technology was capable of hearing what silence had been keeping secret. Inside the Santa Clara County Crime Lab, a technician carefully opened a small envelope marked Ralston Case, 1977 evidence. Inside, a yellowed cigarette pack, sealed and brittle from age. The technician placed the transparent film of prints beneath a scanner. And within moments, the system came alive. A green line traced across the screen, analyzing ridges and patterns the naked eye could never see. Match found. Not to a local. Not to anyone in California. But to a 69-year-old man named Willie Eugene Sims, living quietly in Ohio. Willie Sims had never appeared in the 1977 investigation. He wasn't in the reports, the interviews, or even a suspect list. But now, his prints were a perfect match to those found on the cigarette pack inside Jeanette's car. Investigators began pulling everything they could on Sims: public records, prior arrests, travel history, any connection to California in the late 1970s. And there it was. A series of old employment records placing Sims in San Jose during the summer of 1977. That was enough to reignite the case. In early 2025, investigators from Santa Clara County and the San Jose Police Department boarded a flight to Ohio. Their mission: confirm the connection through DNA. They found Sims living in a small, single-story home on the outskirts of town. Neighbors described him as quiet, someone who mostly kept to himself. When detectives approached him, Sims didn't resist. He agreed to provide a DNA sample. It was a calm exchange, polite, almost routine. But inside, every investigator knew what could happen if that DNA confirmed the match. This wasn't just another cold case reopening. This was the moment 47 years of unanswered questions were about to find their voice. Weeks later, the lab results came in. The DNA on Jeanette's fingernails. The DNA on the shirt used to strangle her. Both matched Willie Eugene Sims. The finding was so precise, so statistically overwhelming, that there was no doubt. The man who'd been living quietly in Ohio was now the prime suspect in one of California's oldest unsolved murders. Deputy District Attorney Rob Baker said it best. When that call came in, the one confirming the DNA match, I think every investigator in that room just went silent. For 47 years, this woman's story had been waiting to be heard. It was a cold morning in March 2025 when Ohio authorities arrived at Sims' home. Their warrant in hand, their mission clear. When they told him why they were there, that he was being charged with the 1977 murder of Jeanette Ralston. He didn't protest. He simply nodded. For the detectives who had flown thousands of miles for this moment, it was surreal. They weren't arresting a violent fugitive running from justice, they were arresting a man who had managed to live nearly half a century under the radar. Sims was extradited to Santa Clara County, California, where he was formally arraigned on charges of murder. He entered the courtroom quietly, the same courtroom where younger prosecutors once swore never to forget Jeanette Ralston's name. When he appeared before the judge, there were no outbursts. No grand confessions. Just a man in handcuffs, and a case file that had finally come full circle. Prosecutors announced that if convicted, Sims could face 25 years to life in prison. For Jeanette's family, this was not about revenge. It was about answers. Her son, now in his 50s, said in a public post, "You've made a 6-year-old kid happy after all these years. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." Inside the Santa Clara DA's cold case unit, Baker and his team looked at the solved board, a wall lined with names, photos, and timelines. Each red tag meant, case closed. Jeanette's name finally had one. Since 2011, the unit had solved more than 24 cold cases. But this one felt different. This one was a promise kept. "We can't bring her back," Baker said. "But maybe, we can give her family the peace they've waited nearly 50 years for." The past doesn't forget. It just waits for someone to listen. 47 years. That's how long it took for a fingerprint and a cigarette pack to speak louder than silence. But as the world turned its attention back to San Jose, a new question emerged. Could time itself be an obstacle to justice? It was early May 2025 when Willie Eugene Sims appeared for his first California hearing. He walked in slowly, his posture hunched, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. For the prosecutors, it was strange to see a man in his late 60s stand accused of a crime committed when he was barely in his 20s. In the courtroom sat reporters, cold case detectives, and, quietly, in the second row, Jeanette Ralston's son. He was 6 when she died. Now, nearly 50, he sat motionless, eyes fixed on the man who had lived a lifetime after the night his mother's ended. Prosecutors laid out the facts. DNA from Ralston's fingernails and the shirt used as a ligature, fingerprint matches on the cigarette pack, and corroborating records placing Sims in the Bay Area in 1977. The courtroom listened as investigators described reopening boxes of evidence sealed with yellowed tape and handwriting from long-retired officers. Each item, a photo, a fiber, a note, became a voice for Jeanette. And the jury of the future listened to a story from the past. It's not the strength of the evidence that moved us, Deputy DA Rob Baker later said. It's the patience of it. The evidence waited, and it waited faithfully. To understand what justice means after 47 years, you must remember the world that existed then. In 1977, San Jose was smaller, quieter, a patchwork of bars, diners, and neighborhoods where everyone seemed to know everyone. Jeanette Ralston had been 24, living in San Mateo, working, planning a future. Friends said she was a light, someone who loved to laugh and never judged others. On the night she disappeared, she was last seen leaving a bar. Within hours, she was gone. By morning, her Volkswagen Beetle was found parked under a pale streetlight. And inside it, a scene detectives never forgot. Her life ended by the hands of someone who likely thought she would be forgotten too. But she wasn't. The advances that solved this case were once science fiction. When Jeanette was killed, DNA profiling didn't exist. Fingerprint automation was still manual card comparison. Fast forward to 2025, digital forensics can rescan, enhance, and reanalyze data once considered unusable. That's what happened here. One prosecutor, almost casually, said, "Let's run those prints again, see if we get lucky." Luck had nothing to do with it. It was persistence, and technology catching up with justice. As Sims sat in custody awaiting trial, defense attorneys raised the question many wondered privately. Can a man in his 60s truly stand trial for a crime committed almost half a century ago? Does age erase accountability? For Jeanette's family, the answer was clear. Justice may move slowly, but it must move. In a rare interview outside the courthouse, her son said softly, "He had 47 years of freedom. My mom had one last breath." No one said another word. In the weeks following Sims's arraignment, the Santa Clara County Cold Case Unit received an outpouring of letters, some from families of other unsolved cases, some from people who'd simply lost faith in justice. The message was the same: if this case could be solved after 47 years, maybe ours still can. Inside the DA's office, Baker stood before a bulletin board covered in photos of victims. Each name pinned with a single word, pending. He moved Jeanette Ralston's photo to the column marked closed. "We don't celebrate," he said. "We remember." Months later, at a small gathering in San Mateo, friends and relatives placed fresh flowers by Jeanette's grave. There was no ceremony, no cameras, just quiet. Her son placed a folded note at the base of the stone. It read simply, "We finally found you justice, Mom." For the first time in nearly 5 decades, the Ralston family could breathe without wondering. Every solved cold case adds something to the science of truth, a roadmap for the next investigator who refuses to give up. In 2025, forensic genealogy and AI-based matching are rewriting how justice operates. But at the center of every breakthrough remains the same force that started it: human determination. Rob Baker said it best at a conference months later. DNA doesn't solve crimes. People do. The evidence just waits for the right hands to hold it. For many who study criminal psychology, the Ralston case reveals something deeper: the way guilt, secrecy, and time collide. Why did Sims allegedly keep silent for so long? Did he think the world had moved on, that evidence fades like memory? Criminologists call this the illusion of decay, the belief that time erases accountability. It doesn't. It only delays the reckoning. In 1977, she was just another name in a case file. In 2025, she became a symbol of why justice never expires. A cigarette pack. A fingerprint. A lifetime later, an answer. Justice doesn't arrive when we expect it. It arrives when truth finally refuses to stay hidden. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe for more real cases solved through time, truth, and persistence.